For years I've carried around a small set of filters. It goes back to my days of film. But do I really need them now? Do you carry a set? Do you need them? Maybe you're thinking about getting some. Well, I want to try and answer the filter question in this video, and I honestly don't know the outcome. You're part of the photography community that gives me so much, so it's time to give back to all of you. It's my mission to inspire and pass on my knowledge, passion and skills. You can subscribe using the watermark button on the screen. Ring your bell to make your subscription count. Please stay to the end and comment. It's your feedback that keeps the channel going. So, I've come up here today to do some landscape photography, but also try and answer a question for myself. And it's probably a question that you guys have been asking yourselves a lot as well. Do you need filters still for landscape photography? And the answer is, I still don't really know. But I'm going to discuss it in this video, and we're going to go through it. And by the end of it, hopefully, by the end of it, I will have an answer for me. Hopefully it'll work for you guys as well. So the filter system that I use at the moment is a well-known square filter system, and the reason I use that is because I want to use the graduated filters. I want to darken those skies down, be able to use it to control my my exposure. Now that goes back to me being a bit old school and starting photography well over 30 years ago, when digital didn't exist, and the only way of modifying your exposure in camera was to use graduated filters. But it's got its drawbacks, and we'll discuss those after I put the filter stack together. So on the 24-105 lens at the moment, there's a 77mm filter thread, so I put that one on first. We've then got the traditional slot filter holder, which we'll put on the lens, and then we're going to put a couple of graduated filters on. The idea is that they'll allow me to manage the exposure that I want. So I'm putting a 0.75 graduated filter in first, and we'll see how that works. Now the beauty with a graduated filter, and I'm not really going to be able to blog this and show it to you, but if you use them you'll understand what I mean, is that you can actually look through the viewfinder, push the filter into place, and you can have a look and see what effect it's having on your exposure levels. Right, okay, so that's helped quite a bit. Even with a 0.75, which is about a 2 stop, I think, I'm still finding that I'm having to underexpose because that sky really is so bright. I will show you the finished pictures in the raw file so you can see what it is I'm trying to do. Now for this I haven't bothered using the cable release, although it's attached, because the shutter speed's really quite high. Okay, so there's our exposures done using the filter. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pack this up, put the filters away, take a few pictures without the filter system, and then we'll get an idea of whether or not, we actually need to use them when we get back to editing. Right, okay, so we'll take the picture again now, but without the filters on. Now, as you can see, it's really quite bright. There's a lot of light coming down on the front of the lens. We're almost shooting into the light. So I always use a lens hood. And I have got a lens hood for my Lee system, but it's a bit bulky to carry about, so I don't tend to use it. So the lens hood is on, good to go. Exactly the same composition as before, but what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to bracket. And the reason for it is because when we take these pictures inside, when we actually go back and edit these images, we're going to be using the bracketed versions of them. And we're going to combine them together and use them inside Photoshop instead of using a graduated filter. So, and I'll show you that later on. So we'll mark the first frame, and then we're going to bracket in 2/3 of a stop. So that's actually an overexposed one, but we might want to use it for the shadows. There's another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. There we go. Okay, so that's it. All I need to do now is pack all the gear away, and then we'll be ready to pack up, get back to the office, and we'll edit these pictures and we'll see what we get at the end of the day. Okay, hello. So at last we are back once again in the office. Seems a long time since I actually stood up at this end of the room and done a video. I've got the window open today because it is red hot. It's got to be up over 30 degrees C, so to shut the windows up in a small office and use some lighting is a big no-no. It's also the school holidays, the children are home, so you might get a little bit of background noise, and I apologise if that's the case. So basically in this video what we're going to be doing with this part is working inside a Lightroom and Photoshop to create the final images. Now this isn't a Photoshop or a Lightroom tutorial, it's simply about going what are the different methods other than using filters, and do I still need to use graduated filters with my landscape photography. So let's go into Lightroom and have a look at that now. Right, okay, so here we are back inside our favourite Lightroom. I'm in the library mode at the moment, so I'm going to select this picture down here straight away and take it into develop. I'm not going to go through the library mode and any of the things which I do in there, or how I do anything in Lightroom as such, because this isn't really about a Lightroom. It's not a Lightroom tutorial. It's comparing different methods of trying to get the same effect from a picture and deciding on whether we use filters or whether we use digital means to do that. So if you want some information on Lightroom, then please have a look at these other videos, which I'll put links to at the end as well, and they might be able to give you some more insight into how I work and how I use Lightroom for certain things. But let's open up this first image in develop. Okay, so the first image is one that I did by using just the filter, and it was very easy to take in camera. You're able to slide the filter in the filter mount up and down. You're able to see the effect. You were even able to watch the histogram and see the exposure change as you were actually producing it, so that worked incredibly well. But one of the problems that we actually had with this, and I'll touch on this first excuse me, before I go into the edits, is the fact that you can sort of see a line along here where the filter effect starts and stops. So you can see that this bit is darker and this bit's immediately a bit lighter. So you know that's the interface between the clear part and the graduated part of the filter, and that's the main disadvantage. Other than, of course, having to carry the filters with you in the first place. But it was very easy to edit. It's really quite intuitive because the tones are almost right in the picture straight away. You've got the tonal range already there, and a little bit of adjustment to the color temperature, the exposure, brought the highlights down a little bit, and the whites and the blacks, just to add a little bit of contrast in certain areas and retain some detail. Other than that, adding a little bit of texture to bring some detail out in the granite, taking the saturation down a bit because it was just a little bit too green and powerful. There was very little I had to do to the image. I always apply chromatic aberration and lens corrections as well to it, so that was part of my standard workflow. So that all worked out very well. So am I pleased with the result? Well, yes, I am. I would like it to be a little bit different than this, but like I say, I've not spent a lot of time on the editing side of it. The main objective of this was to see if I could get an image that I liked using a filter and then compare it to using digital means of trying to achieve the same effect. So let's go on to the next way that I did this. So here we are back in the library mode again. Now this picture here, let me just expand that stack, is what I use for the HDR image. Now I have to be honest, I didn't actually intend to use HDR when I did this video. I was just going to use exposure blending and a filter system, and the reason for that, I actually don't like, or haven't liked using HDR in the past, but when I started working on this image I thought, oh, I've got nothing to lose, I'll give it a whirl. I was pleasantly surprised. So it was a very basic HDR. I used two images. I used this one here now where the cursor's on there, which has obviously got the foreground in and no sky, and this one's got the sky in the background and no foreground, and then I combine those together to produce the HDR image. So let's go into develop and open that up. So okay, so here's here we are with the HDR version of it. So what have we got that's different to the other one? Well, the main thing of course is that it looks much more natural down in this area here. We haven't got this division between where we had the filter and where we've got the interface with the non-filtered area. So that's worked very, very nicely. I also found that having the wider tonal range to work with in editing meant that I didn't have to do quite so much in terms of editing. Once again, a tweak with the colour, a little bit with the exposure and contrast. That's what I did find with the HDR, is it came out much flatter. It needed a little bit more work on it. A lot more adjustment in the highlights and shadows and the whites and the blacks. I seem to do a lot more work in that area than I did before. But, you know, depending on the camera and what you've got, you can get away with some heavy editing sometimes. I also did a bit more on the vibrance and the saturation, because the overall effect of this image was to be much duller than what I had experienced when I was out in the field. Once again, I didn't bother with any of the adjustments in tonal curves or lens or down through split toning or anything, but I put my standard lens corrections on as I did with the other image. So that gives us the HDR image. So the last one is the exposure blend. An exposure blend style of working is what I was actually going for at the time when I decided to do this video. I thought, well, actually I can use a different file instead of a graduated filter, so I can put one sky over the top of the foreground and use that instead of the graduated. So what I basically did was I picked one of the bright pictures on the screen, took one of the darker ones as well for the sky, and then eventually opened them both up inside of Photoshop. So what I did was I imported these pictures into one Photoshop file, and I brought them in as separate layers. So what that meant is I was able to stack one on top of the other and then decide how much of the background comes through and how much of the foreground comes through. And we do that using something called a layer mask, which is what you can see down here. Now the area of the mask that's filled in at the top, the black bit, is where I've applied a graduated filter to it. But what you can also do with the graduated filter, what you can also do with the layer mask is you can modify it with a brush. So I was able to apply the graduated filter effect and then actually brush out along this edge part of that filter, so that you haven't got that sort of like dark line running across like you do with a traditional filter. And I was quite pleased with this result. And other than the basic edits which I'd done in Lightroom with the other photographs, I haven't really touched it at all. So this worked reasonably well. It did take a lot more editing, a lot more messing about, trying to get this edge right. And to be honest, I could probably make it a lot better than it is now. But that's something I need to do a little bit more work on, a little bit more practice with editing it in Photoshop. But it did work reasonably well. So here we have all three versions of the image up on the screen. I tried to get them reasonably close to each other, but because of the different ways they were produced, it didn't really work very well. So top right hand side we've got the graduated filter, bottom right hand side we have the HDR, and on the left we've got the version using the two separate layers. And it's the version using the two separate layers that appeals to me more. Now I don't think this was a very good trial of editing, of comparing different editing styles, because one of the problems that I had was that I started comparing each picture to each other and trying to get them to match and look the same, which in effect I was never going to achieve, and I don't really know why I ever tried doing it, because it just wasn't going to work that way. So what I did after this was I sort of decided that basically, yes, I could get rid of filters. I couldn't get rid of the neutral density filters or the polarizing filters, but I didn't need to carry graduated filters anymore, because either one of these methods gives me a very good result. And the amount of control that you've got in post-processing, I would argue now, even gives you a little bit more control over the finished result. But what I found was that when I was editing all of these images together, I struggled with the fact that I could see all three at the same time, and I was comparing one to the other, which is completely the wrong thing to do. So I'm going to finish the video by showing you a completed edited image without comparing any of the others together, and I did that a few days later after I'd had time to clear my mind of these and start again from scratch. So I'm going to put up an image at the end, and that's going to basically be the edited version using filters only, and I'll let you decide whether you like it or not. I hope you're enjoying the video. Maybe you would like to carry on, so try these suggestions next. I want to share more knowledge, more skills, more passion and stories about photography with you. So think about subscribing. If you do, ring the bell. It will make your subscription count. If you have time, comment. I will see you on the next video. Get out there and enjoy your photography.